Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just going to give it one more minute. We'll let other people join, and then we will get started with the webinar. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. My name is Matt McCarty. I'm the Vice President of the API Academy here at CA Technologies. Today's topic is going to be talking about how do we use APIs to create an omni-channel retail experience. And I'm very happy to be joined by Rich Pulliam, who's our VP of Global Partnerships, and somebody who's very experienced, versed, and is a pioneer in the API space across multiple industries, including retail. For today's session, we're going to be going through the whole session and slides, but we definitely want to make sure we have the opportunity to take your questions. So we'll be doing a question period at the end, but to make sure that we don't miss any questions, please feel free to just put your questions in the chat box that's part of the WebEx, and we'll make sure that we get to those at the end. So this is I think a very timely topic. As you'll see, seems like there's daily developments in the retail space about how to leverage all the different channels that are emerging in retail. So we'll be going over the history of that, as well as giving you some pointers on how you can be ready for this and prepare for it. So right now, I'd like to hand it over to Rich to take you through the past, present, and future of retail.
Great, thanks, Matt. So hi everybody. I'm glad everybody could join us today. So always a boring topic, talking about omni-channel in the retail space. And there's only about 5 days worth of stuff to discuss. We're going to try to do it in about 45 minutes, so we can have time to take your questions. So let's get started. Yeah, first things first. I mean, we may as well, let's go talk about the 800-pound gorilla that just walked in the room. As if Amazon wasn't a big enough gorilla, now it has a phone. So anyone out there who doesn't know this, you need to be really quite aware of it. What it is basically is Amazon's launched a phone with a Firefly button. Now, what the button is maybe less important than what the phone really is, which is a shopping device. The Wall Street Journal, I believe, called it a showrooming on steroids. So everyone in the retail space, I'm sure familiar with the idea of people going into a retail store, looking at the products, sort of handling them, evaluating them in person, but then looking online for if they can get it cheaper, right? Well, Amazon has just taken that one step further, and so if you look at the omni-channel space in aggregate, as everybody knows, it's sort of Amazon in some respects, and on one end of the big retailers on the other. What Amazon's done, very omni-channel focused, is to basically say, look, when you walk into a store, just point your phone at a product, bottle of Nutella, as he demonstrated, or frankly, it could be anything really. A guitar could use image recognition technology to do this, and say, why don't you just go ahead and buy it, click the button and buy it on Amazon. So it's in my mind, it really is almost it's really one real strong stake in the ground in the omni-channel against the big box retailers. I think it's going to be really interesting to see where that plays out. Now, if you take the other side of that coin, for better or worse, about a month ago, if you missed it, Google announced that Google Now will alert you when you're physically near, in proximity to a product that you've been researching online. All right, so it's almost the inverse of what you just saw Amazon do for the moment anyway. So what Google's going to say is, hey, we noticed online you've been browsing this particular product, you've been searching for this, and we noticed you're right next to it right now. So why don't you go in the store and buy it, right? And I'm sure Google will work out a cut of that purchase as well. It's really, if you think about online search, now we're talking about proximity search, which is really pretty interesting when you think about it. It really turns retargeting on its head. So if you look at Amazon and Google and what they're doing right now, right this very moment, the last 30 days, these are really strong statements from not just mobility, but really the all-encompassing omni-channel, which is physical proximity as well as whatever device you happen to be looking at. Okay. So, obviously you can't do a retail webinar without going back in time, right? So we'll do the obligatory walk through that. Now, unless you were born after 1990, and sadly I'm sure more of you are than used to be, but in any case, there used to be things called stores where you couldn't buy things online, right? So the idea of retailing was that you put the items that people really wanted at the back or the corners of the store, like milk and meat, forcing people to walk through aisles of flashy and fun things to buy in the interim, right? Put the things that kids want on the lower aisles and all of that. It's shelf space and all of these kind of modeling, really intricate scientific modeling of retail behavior is based on psychology, and the offline world had it down to a science, obviously. Obviously, that's changed in today's world. We're going to even preempt e-commerce here, right? So T-commerce, it's television commerce, and it's not even new, right? Actually, there were some of the earliest patents and earliest products developed in the retail space, amazingly, in the early to mid-90s, were assuming that the internet would be connected to the television, and the television you'd be watching something like Friends, and you say, oh, I love that sweater Rachel's wearing, or that tie that Ross is wearing, or whatever, and you can just click to buy right from the show. There was an assumption based that would be where the market was headed. So that's, ironically, though that's actually coming out now as a modern technology, that kind of stuff was done quite a long time ago. And they sort of missed the boat, needless to say. The internet and sort of e-commerce browsers technologies took off from that point forward. So why not use a Barbara Streisand quote? So memories, right? Does anyone remember pets.com or Webvan? This is always a little bit more entertaining slide to use in front of an audience instead of on a webinar, because usually you get some chuckles out of it. But here's the point, right? Which was in the early e-commerce days, you had the bricks and mortar companies basically were putting initially just their product catalogs and store lists on their website. And then eventually they moved into actually being you were able to buy the products online. And what they tended to do is put every single product they had on the front page. The first page of that website was so important. So it just went on and on and on, scrolling down and up and down. It wasn't smart. It wasn't a seamless experience for users. And then you had the online retailers, pets.com being one, Webvan being another one, for example. These were very visible use cases of heavily funded companies and IPOs that went bust, ironically because they couldn't build the infrastructure. So when we think today about how people like Netflix were able to supersede Blockbuster because with the DVDs in the mail and the streaming and distribution efficiencies, and Amazon, of course, with their extremely efficient infrastructure for distribution. Ironically, in the early web days, a lot of these web companies did not survive because they couldn't build traditional infrastructure that the bricks and mortars already had. So getting groceries to your house, a la Webvan, was a lot more complicated and expensive to build that at a national level than you could support in the early days, right? The capital required to do that. So, that's really where the market has come from that perspective. Now, where the e-commerce, the retail space went from there, right? And I'll put some numbers on it, 1.0, 2.0 kind of thing. Personalization was a big movement in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was involved in some of that in a previous life. So there were two primary types of personalization in the e-commerce space. One was clickstream, which of course Amazon was a master of. The clickstream targeting was based on what you're clicking on. So if you went to Amazon and you clicked on diapers or you clicked on baby books, for example, needless to say, what Amazon would start doing was showing you other baby-related stuff. Now, that was really impactful and important, and they still do it today. But here's the problem with that: if I bought a baby book for my sister's kid, that doesn't mean I have a baby. So maybe there should be some combination of my profile and my history that should be combined with that. So one of the other components that we saw in those personalization days was profile-based targeting. Now, this is a space that the bricks and mortars and the more traditional retailers across different elements of that space had a much better experience in, because they understood generally they understood who their users were. That came from the old days of the local grocer, right? They know you, they know what you like to eat, the old travel agents and things like that. So, they had loyalty programs. Airlines had loyalty programs, for example. They understood your typical buying history. They understood maybe you had 2 kids, and this is the kind of content you wanted. So the whole premise of that personalization movement in the e-commerce space, what we used to call it zero-time transactions, right? And the premise of that was, I want to be able to predict behavior. I want to be able to pattern you to a point where when you go to my website, I want to recognize you immediately, and I want to show you exactly what it is you want to buy at the time you want to buy it, and all you have to do is click, right? Ideally, I even have your credit card on file, and you don't even have to go put that information in, so I don't lose you. And I think that's important to understand, because when you think about the leakage that happens online, even today, where if someone walks in your store physically, they're a captive audience. They've willingly made themselves a captive market to you. Whereas in the online space, I can walk in and out of your storefront real time. I can be in 5 stores at once in the browser, right, for example. So when that zero-term transaction was more and more vital, because you didn't want to lose the customer to someone selling the same product at a lower price. 2.0. Now, when most people think of Web 2.0, for example, you think of things like the social media, social marketing, the social data movement, and that was definitely a big piece of it. The social element was, some of us that got in that space a while back. The premise was, if you want to monetize the graph, right, it's one thing to say that, hey, there's real user reviews of this camera or this hotel, all right, that's one thing. But if you knew that it wasn't just real user reviews, but users like you, right? So is it an 18-year-old kid? Is it a 70-year-old man or a woman who's reviewing that restaurant? Might have very different opinions about whether they like it or not as it relates to you. So when you think about the social graph as it pertains to retail in that element, and still really happening today, it's not just about user reviews. It's not just about the pure consumerization of information on products and retail, but it's just as important to think about the context of, do I know that person? Do I know who that person, what type of profile that person is? Does it relate to my context? And I'm going to talk a lot about context in my slides in this part. APIs, right? So APIs were really started, I guess, in 2002 from a retail perspective, at least in the open API world. It's really where the movement came from. The idea being that there will, instead of having one giant superstore online, right? Like you build, like in the offline space, if enough people of a demographic live in a certain neighborhood, you build a store there, right? So it's classic densification is the word that's used for it. In the API, in the online superhighway, so to speak, what ends up happening is you build a giant superstore. It's supposed to serve everybody. So you have to build to the lowest common denominator. You sell every product to everybody. And that's not ideal. So the idea, it's really Amazon started it, which was, but if you expose your inventory, if you expose your shopping cart, if you expose your content and services, through APIs. What ends up happening is you can keep your superstore, but you're going to allow niche products, let's say a mountain climbing blog or a mommy's blog or whatever, these niche groups of people, niche demographics that are self-identifying, to also have their own retail experience that's using that API but contextually for their frame of mind. And I think that's something that we've seen from 2002 all the way up through today, and it's still a movement that's going on. But it's the idea of, instead of one giant store, you have thousands of bookstores, for example, or whatever, any kind of device, electronic stores and things like that. You know, the other piece I think that's important to understand is mobile and location-based services, which we're going to get into in these slides as we go. So yeah, obviously, you know, this is not an Amazon commercial, I promise, but you know, we've got to keep talking about Amazon, especially when not just when it comes to retail, but when it comes to APIs. Because I think all of us who in the API space, I mean, I can't even think of an exception to that, really got into it based on, a lot of it came from this memo. So give or take in 2002, Jeff Bezos, in an internal memo, it's quite famous now, and basically what it said was, all teams will expose their data at Amazon. Teams must communicate through interfaces. No other form of inter-process communication is allowed. Interfaces, without exception, must be externalizable, and anyone who doesn't do this will be fired. And those are pretty strong words, but it's impactful, and it's important to understand that what Jeff did in the very early days, long before there was even anything resembling an API movement, was saying, we're not going to be a standalone online superstore. We're not going to just have our own infrastructure. What we're going to do is we're going to enable our partners the same way we enable our internal people. And by the way, we're going to enable our internal resources the same way we enable the external resources. So it's a two-way street, and it's really more about making the company more efficient. It's about turning the company, instead of a retailer, into a platform. And really, that was the core basis on which everything came out of, including Amazon Web Services and the cloud and everything else. So we look at Amazon, you know, the Amazon marketplace itself. Yes, you know, it's Amazon versus everyone else, so to speak, in the big box retailers. But in truth, Amazon also supports quite a few smaller and local retailers as well. In other words, if you don't have the infrastructure, right, Amazon has it, and you can basically use their infrastructure to sell your products and services. So it's, you know, and it allows local, you know, any particular retailer could basically have an omni-channel solution. They can offer you payment, they can offer you inventory and distribution and shipping and promotion, and now you've got the Firefly button on their phone. So again, there's a large amount of opportunity that Amazon is enabling in that space. And even if you're competing with Amazon, it's important to understand the core premise of why they operate the way they operate. So omni-channel, right? So where have we gotten to today? You know, and again, I'm going to keep harping on this, but contextual retail. In my mind, when I think about omni-channel, right, it's not just mobile, it's not on the web, it's not just on the TV, it's not in your store, it's not on Google Glass, it's not in your car, it's in all of those things. And so when you really think about why it matters, it's because your frame of mind, the consumer's frame of mind, on any particular device at a specific time of day is extremely important to be efficient as a retailer, right? It's no different than from an advertising perspective, is understanding who the person is and their frame of mind. If you think about why Google was so impactful, when you went to Google to look, or go to Google to look for something, your frame of mind is you're looking for something, right? So that's your persona. Now, that same human being might be in a different mindset on a different type of website where they're not looking for something. And so it's understanding the context of why they're using that product at that moment. So getting the right product to the right person at the right time with the right payment method, that's really the omni-channel model as I see it. Another thing that's important to understand, I think, is the data side of it, and obviously we can't go into an enormous amount of detail today. We don't have enough time for it, but this is the way I would look at data. You know, every retailer out there, or anyone touching retail, has data, right? You're sitting on piles of data. That's everyone's favorite words these days, are big data. But here's the thing. Data is effectively a useless asset in the back of your databases, whether it's structured or unstructured. It's just sitting there. And like a currency, it has no value if it isn't moving. right? So, just like money has value for banks in its velocity, by moving back and forth, that's how it generates opportunity. And that's how it generates value, incremental value. So if you think about data without an API in front of it is, for all intents and purposes, it's effectively useless. So it's almost bordering on a liability, right? Waiting for someone to come and hack into it. So APIs and API management in front of that from a security perspective are vital, because what APIs do is allow your data to move. And by moving your data, the idea is my data plus your data actually can be greater than the sum of those parts. So API-driven context: who, when, where, how, and why. These are the questions, frankly, that I use in any particular business context, in my experience, but APIs are core to that, right? Context is core to that. Who are you selling the product to? When are you selling it to them? Where are they at that moment physically? How are you going to communicate with them, right? On what device, and why, right? Why are you trying to sell this product to that person in that moment? So if you think about these on the left-hand side, I look at these, I call them enablers, right? So API-based enablers. In the omni-channel experience, I think these things are critical to understand. Mobile is obvious, it's enormous, so I'm going to simplify this, but the idea of mobile is that it's anytime, anywhere, right? So whether it's Google Glass, whether it's your phone, the person is mobile. The point is that this is an API-based model where you're trying to get to the person wherever they might be. And the other thing about the mobile device that's important to understand is intimacy. The mobile device is not like a website. It's not like a shared computer. A mobile device is, it's smaller, it belongs to an individual typically, it is extremely personal. So when you communicate with someone, rather than spamming someone a bunch of coupons or offers on a phone, the more intimate you can make it, the more impactful it's going to be. Location. This is a monster subject. Again, it could justify its own webinar, and I'm going to talk a little bit more depth about this in another slide here, but basically there's really two core ways to look at location. One is latitude and longitude, right? Where is the thing on a map? Where's the store on a map? Where's the user on a map? But also proximity, right? I'm sure you've read a lot about this. A lot of you probably know a little bit about this or a lot about it. But proximity is evolving very quickly, right? So for years, we were all waiting for example, Apple to put NFC in their phones, which hasn't happened. So now we're talking about the new model is BLE, Bluetooth Low Energy, or iBeacons. So in other words, there's these businesses out there that are basically putting physical beacons in storefronts and in locations in airports and malls that recognize when a phone crosses into that beacon's trajectory and then can communicate with that phone at a very personal, very small local level. So in other words, it's not about where you are in proximity to the store, it's about where are you in the store. Are you in the store? What aisle are you in? Or what floor are you on? What TV are you standing in front of? Are you standing in front of the cash register? This is what proximity really does. Wi-Fi is another piece. Velocity. Velocity is something that I haven't heard a lot about, but I think it's very important. Just think about it in context. If someone's walking through a store or past a store, or someone's standing still in front of a specific project or product, or in front of a storefront window, that matters from a retailer perspective, right? So velocity it does matter, and that's more data, that's more API-driven data that you can use. Geofencing as well. There's a lot of API-based geofencing capabilities out there, both in the phones themselves and in various solutions that aggregate network location and proximity and GPS. Social. I talked a bit about that, but again, when you think about social context, think about how does the graph influence brand and behavior. Think about social data on mobile is critical to context, okay? So when I say that, I mean, when you think about using data to try to understand who the user is in context, let's be perfectly frank, Facebook has a lot of data. They know a lot about you. Google Plus knows a lot about you. There's these social graphs out there that have a lot of intimate knowledge of who the user is that you can't get as easily on, let's say, a mobile ad platform or ad network, sorry. So in that regard, think about your retail reach out to consumers, about obviously using those social graphs, not just having a Facebook page, but using the graph data to communicate and understand who is going to influence people on products and how do you get out there. Payments, wallets, point of sale, right? So payments, you're seeing the MasterCard has a digital wallet, V.me for Visa, Amex, there's Square, PayPal, things like this. So there's a variety of wallet technologies, and it's growing exponentially out there today. The same thing for point of sale. So point of sale systems really have been the holy grail, I think, at the local merchant level for a lot of people. I mean, I've seen the big couponing companies literally mailing tablets to merchants just to try to solve the point of sale system they can't problem that they can't solve. In other words, if someone goes in and buys something, how do you create attribution and sort of conversion back to the person that drove the user in there in the first place? So point of sale is going to be, I think, it's a really big area of focus right now, and I think as people are seeing some good solutions out there in the market that are coming into that space. Identity, Matt's going to talk a fair amount about identity, but identity is critical when you think about context in Omni-Channel. Who's the user and what device are they on? So if it's the same person that's staring at the television, they have their computer open and their phone, and if you can find a way to correlate those three things, that's very important. Are they in the car? Who is it? That kind of thing. Identity is critical, but not just knowing who they are, but making sure that the information you're gathering and using to create value for that user, at the same time you're keeping that information private and secure. And the last piece is loyalty. Basically, there's a variety of ways to use loyalty programs, not least because they have a lot of buyer history, but using virtual currencies to influence behavior. Hey, you know what? My store is empty on a Monday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so I'm going to offer maybe not just a coupon, maybe I'm going to offer a 500 miles or points of some sort to come in right now and engage with my product and my brand. So the retail ecosystem, this is a pretty simplified slide, but I'm using it because I want to explain that when you think about an API-driven retail ecosystem, you think about two things. One is horizontal APIs, location. What ad network are you using? What network are they on? AT&T, Verizon, what media content, horizontal media content, what device are they on, and what social network. These are all APIs that are horizontal. They apply to any vertical. But then you combine those with vertical APIs, the retailers and brands, right? The Best Buys and the Apples and the Gaps and the Sonos and everything out there. So you have your own APIs, you have your own data, you have your own engagement you want to have with your consumers. But obviously there's other pieces of that puzzle. Retail content, product reviews, Amazon, Google, Yellow Pages, Yelp, mobile wallets, digital wallets as we talked about, and merchant and consumer data, right? There are big piles of data and data providers, including from the payment processors and everyone else. And really, as it relates specifically to, how does this merchant perform on a Monday between 2 and 5 in the afternoon, right? So these kind of things are critical. These are vertical APIs. And when I look at this slide, what I typically try to focus people on is it's not just about putting a price on your API or your data and throwing it over the fence. It's about composite applications, composite APIs. It's also about bundling your APIs as well. So think about your data plus a social graph API plus network authentication on AT&T or Verizon, for example, and a loyalty API, and you have something pretty compelling. So the point is, it's your data plus other data equals something greater than the sum. Rich content delivered over multiple access channels. I mean, really, this is a core crux of the Omni-Channel, right? Which is typically today, people are staring at their television, and when the commercials come on, even if they're not DVR'd the content, they're staring at their phone or their tablet at home. So it certainly makes a lot of sense, back to the earlier T-commerce idea and premise that we discussed, is if you're looking at an Anthony Bourdain show that's he's eating at a restaurant in San Francisco, or he's over in Puerto Rico or wherever he is, then so why not push something to the user on their phone related to that? Hey, if you want to buy an airline ticket, do you want to make a reservation at that restaurant? There's all kinds of ways that you can use even media-based APIs to create applications and retail opportunities that are based on that cross-channel content. There's other things I've seen out there which are, digital paper scrolled on the side of a storefront where you can walk up, it can identify you, you can drag the product you want, slip it in, just wipe your hand down and puts it on the phone, you walk in and buy it. There's a whole bunch of access points on multiple channels, right, in terms of the displays. Real-time and location-aware, augmented reality, things like Foursquare, obviously, right, as everyone knows, you can check into a place and get a deal, get a coupon. If you check in, you can get a kickback on your Amex bill. There's a variety of the location-based value propositions. Layer, which is a really interesting company for augmented reality. The idea here is that each layer is an API, right? So if I'm looking through my camera on my phone at space, right, so the camera sees one thing, there's also a map that correlates to that, and then there's layers on the map. So, okay, show me restaurants as I move, scroll from left to right, or show me locations. All these things are APIs. Each layer is an API. Very interesting content. Zillow, another classic example of an API-driven business that did for distribution and aggregation of content. And again, location, some more location stuff it's been bubbling up for a little while now. Again, more than points on a map. You know, Shopkick, everyone I'm sure is familiar with Shopkick, which is offering points for going into a store. You know, now they've got a business, they've launched a pilot with Macy's, for example, where it's a beacon technology, I think, in the store in San Francisco and New York City, where based on what aisle you're in the shoe aisle or you're in the cosmetics aisle, and they can provide you a coupon or some kind of a recommendation based on that proximity. Estimote, similarly, is really about, their premise is that it's not about applications, that the store itself is an application. So when your phone comes in proximity of those beacons, it's basically going to communicate to the user at a personal level in the right moment at the right time. Leap Commerce was another interesting business that was focused on mobile, social, and location. So again, these things are bubbling up all over the place, and they're very compelling, and these are things that the retailers should be looking at from the omni-channel side. Another thing, a couple other little points I'll make before passing it back to Matt. Natural language and visual search. These are really interesting subjects that have come up recently. Natural language search, it's like talking to Siri, right? The idea is when you just ask a question in your natural language, hey, I'm looking for tennis shoes. And whether it's your computer, whether it's your phone, by the way, where it could be in the store technically and ask that question. And the idea is the store could tell you where exactly you should be going to look for the product and show you the product that's most relevant to what you're looking for based on who you are and what you typically buy. So natural language search is a really interesting and growing space that applies all over the board, even in your car. Visual search, similarly, is thinking about your retail experience in a visual nature. It's not just about having the Google spiders crawl all over your site and getting the best keywords organically. You know, when you really think about where the space is headed, everything's becoming more visual, right? So how are you found in a visual, how are you displayed in a visual sense is extremely important in this new omni-channel methodology. And finally, you know, the only thing I'll say about the Internet of Things before passing it to Matt is just that, you know, for years we've talked about, hey, your refrigerator, your smart fridge will know when you're almost out of milk, and it will just order it for you, right? Well, that's been talked about for 10, 12, 14 years, but that moment is actually here, right? So the products are smart. Your car will know when it's almost out of gas, obviously, and it can take you to or tell you where the nearest gas station is. There's a variety of things that the things themselves, machine to machine, that are API driven, that can know a lot about the consumer and the product, the thing you're using, and then they can recommend other retail experiences beyond that. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass this back to Matt.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rich. So yeah, I think we talked, you know, that was a fantastic survey of the landscape around retail. You know, there's so many developments happening. As we've seen in a lot of different industries, right, we're seeing somewhat of the consumerization of retail. We're seeing control being passed back to the consumer. And we're also seeing, you know, blurred lines between industries, blurred lines between, and I guess once again, Amazon is the poster child for this, right? Starting out as a online book retailer, but then from there just spreading out into everything from just commonplace retailing to service provider to payments provider, and especially into technology provider. So, you know, there's so much opportunity for retailers. At the same time, there are all sorts of new threats being presented by new competitors. So, you know, what's the best way to position yourself to take advantage of this omni-channel experience as a retailer, where you change things from being, you know, the bricks and mortar store that everybody comes to being the consumer that you can bring all of the services to. So first of all, you know, there's a lot of talk around platform. So, you know, what is a platform really? You know, in the context of omni-channel, I think it's extremely important to really position your services in a platform context, and that is what APIs are intended for. You know, it's not that a company will go out and expose an API for the sake of exposing an API, right? It's important to have a well-designed API, you know, that supports multiple protocols, but really the goal behind that is that if you're able to expose your assets through APIs, you create, in essence, a platform that people can build things around your services. And this is particularly important when in the context of omni-channel. Traditional channels that we have, such as point-of-sale devices, you see there up on the upper left, you know, are somewhat, or historically have been somewhat rigid, and you know, there are reasons for this, and security and so on. But still, there's a common thread between what those require in terms of inventory management, and in terms of offering products and combining products and so on with the other channels in the space. So you've got point of sale, you've got e-commerce through the web, you've got m-commerce with mobile. Retailers, I think, have a great opportunity to expand into the social network realm as well. In fact, talk more about that in the context space. But, you know, all sorts of cloud-based services, and as Rich just talked about, you know, what are the opportunities for the Internet of Things? It's too early to say, really, you know, how valuable the fridge that orders your milk will be in the grand scheme of things. I know that when I was recently looking for a new fridge, salesperson was trying to tell me how it was so great that you could now watch movies on your fridge. I don't know if I'm going to be watching movies on my fridge anytime soon, or buying the toaster that gives me the weather report on the toast. I can look at my phone and get the weather report. But the point is, it's tough to say we're going to bet the farm on a particular IoT device scenario. But if you're able to offer the services that really drive your business as a retailer into that new channel, the chances are opening that up to a number of developers who can come up with new ideas, try them out, crash and burn, or you know, go rags to riches. Your business can benefit from that, and the way to benefit from that is offering that channel of communication. So it's really important to have APIs exposed for the core of your business, whether it's payment, wallet services, distribution, loyalty, I think, and identity are very important ones, given that so much of this is driven around binding relationship with the consumer. So having the APIs exposed in a consistent way is really important. And that's really what we offer from a product line. We have a whole suite of products around API management that allow you to plug into your existing assets, expose them as APIs in a way that is friendly to all of these channels in retail. But going beyond that, you know, we start to look at, okay, so we know why APIs are important for retail. We know why they're fundamental for enabling an omni-channel experience. And we know that we need to open things up and expose our APIs in order to create a platform for our own developers and partners and external developers to build new offerings and build out the new channels and strengthen the existing channels. But then you get into, you know, what are the characteristics of a strong omni-channel platform that is going to be able to scale, you know, if successful. Okay, how do we make sure that we don't cause problems with this? And of course, identity and security go hand in hand here. So identity is so fundamental to the omni-channel experience. Rich talked about this. It's not just about consumer identity. It's about identity of devices. It's about identity or information and attributes about the users. And it's about the relationships between the identities. You need to identify the location of the consumer. You need to identify the consumer, identify what vehicle they're using for accessing your services. You may even need to identify the location and so on. So having this end-to-end identity and security is a fundamental tenet of the platform. It's got to be a solution that will really meet the requirements of omni-channel and be able to plug into how you can identify consumers, whether they're in your store, on your website, on your app, but also be able to plug that information into the services that you have. You're not going to want to go and rip out all the investments you've made in the identity space and the security space in order to spin up these new platforms. You want to leverage as much of an investment as you can. And that's where our API management solution as well, and its very flexible policy framework, is an incredible tool for connecting the information about identity into the systems that you already have and putting them in the right context that's meaningful to the services that you're offering. I think that I think it's very interesting in the retail space specifically that so many cases and problems that we hear about lately relate to privacy of user data. I think retail is the one industry where people are just much more willing to share their information, because if I'm out shopping for goods and services, it's to my benefit that the company I'm dealing with or the potential companies I'm dealing with understand what I'm looking for. This is where I welcome the context, and especially when you get into the social networking scenarios, you've probably seen this. There are some really interesting opportunities for retailers to give special offers for referrals through social networking and so on. So I think that, you know, the nature of shopping is bargaining, and by having that, the insight that you can gain into consumers through their contextual information that they're willing to share is worth its value to your business. And so if you can accept that and provide offers to those consumers, then they get something out of the deal as well. So I just think that as opposed to other industries, whether it's, you know, government and banking and telecommunications or even just the raw social networks themselves, people are very leery about sharing information because they're not sure what purposes they'll be put to. But retail, when people are out there shopping, looking for goods and services, it is an area where they're willing to share this information. So we have a big opportunity around what type of identity information we can gather and use in order to offer services that are valuable to your business and valuable to consumers. And with the API management platform that we have, especially including our OAuth toolkit, with OAuth being so explosively popular in the web and mobile spaces, this allows us to talk and gather that contextual identity information from these new channels, but then put it into, translate it, apply it in our policies, and then connect into your existing investments so that we can quickly spin up those APIs in a very secure way and get all the identity information that we need in order to provide these value-added services. I think it's worth looking at mobile specifically. Again, talking about identity in a mobile context. You've got the device, you've got the user, you have the app, and even other things like location information or patterns, historical patterns. We have a tremendous opportunity to, as I said, kind of take this let's make a deal approach of using that information in a way that's welcomed by the consumer. And further to that point, in talking about the privacy issues where we've seen people have, there might be data leakage or, passwords need to change or exploits on spoofing of users and so on. We recognized that in the mobile space, with devices being so personalized and so capable, and yet not the property of companies, and it's, you know, blurring the lines between what is the actual perimeter of a company, where does the company end and the consumer begin. It makes it a little more difficult in the mobile space. And this is why with our mobile access gateway product, we've actually stepped outside of the walls of the enterprise and are offering solutions that go natively into the device themselves. And the reason for this is it allows us to help provide a much more secure channel of communication, allows, you know, as a retailer, allows your consumers to feel much safer using your applications if you're using the security protection that we offer, which allows you to create, you know, a secure channel of communication between consumer and retail service provider through the APIs, allows you to recognize the relationship between the device user and the device itself, as well as the apps on that device, allows you to provide strong authentication between, you know, leveraging those relationships, and even getting into things like geofencing using the location-based services on the device. So it's really important, because mobile is such a hot channel right now. It's very important from a retail perspective that you are looking specifically at that channel and the unique technological aspects of what it can bring. I think, you know, one thing that we have observed multiple times as we're working with large retail customers is there's really a shift away from, you know, or there's really a step up in order of magnitude and orders of magnitude around what's required for quality of service. So we've seen companies that might have some, you know, API that's used internally for a particular purpose. You know, maybe it's inventory related or pricing related, and then they take the step to say, okay, you know what, we now want to offer this API to the outside world, consumer facing. Well, in a lot of cases that will bring exponential growth in the actual transaction volumes that come in there. And in the case of certain retail specific events like Cyber Monday, Black Friday type volumes, you're going to need to really scale up those APIs. So I have a case study to talk about on this one, but really as you expose your existing assets and, you know, your retail services through API channels, you've got to be prepared for very high scale services that need to be available 24/7, 365. So you know, again, our gateway technology, which is the traffic manager for all APIs, message calls that are coming through your systems, is, you know, unparalleled in terms of its ability to perform at scale. And it's also you know, built for mission critical operations. You know, our whole customer list is really not just in retail, but in very high volume like telco and financial services cases, tested at the highest levels of performance. So it's something that you need to be prepared for as well when you get into omni-channel, because, you know, the technology feeds now are not, you're getting away from batch orders and so on. It's when everything is real time, everything has to be available all the time, and has to be very responsive. So unless you can scale to meet the highest needs, you're going to start slowing traffic down, which is a turnoff for consumers. So it has to be fast, has to be available, and has to be up. So the last aspect that really is so fundamentally important for omni-channel and for retail in the API world is this notion of developer ecosystem. So we've seen some examples of as I said, I think IoT is a good example where it's a good opportunity to provide an open APIs to help get some collaborative, innovative ideas from the outside world. But really a developer ecosystem is not just the open web. We have to look at all aspects. So it's important that as you open things up to these mobile channels and collaborative channels, the most effective platform that you're going to provide is one that's very well articulated. It's very accessible. Developers know where to go in order to find the services and APIs that they can use to build new applications, build new channels for your business. So it could be members of your own company that will be doing this, could be partners that you want to accommodate, or it could be those entrepreneurial developers living in their parents' basement that could come up with $1 billion idea. In any case, you need to accommodate all those. And this is really the front door to innovation and the front door to driving out these new channels of business. So, and this is something that's very important for API, the world of APIs, as opposed to the past where it was just developers might be taken for granted and forced into doing things that they, finding things hard to do, they might tune out. Really, you need to cater to these developers because they're going to be the key to getting the new services to market. And this is where our API portal comes into play, which has ways of accommodating all these different communities of developers. They can sign up with different roles. You can have different workflows assigned so that you know who's using your APIs. You can make it easy for them to use your APIs, and you can make sure that whether it's the project that's critical to your fiscal year for your business that needs to hit a deadline in order to offer new services for Black Friday, or whether it's just soliciting input for some new shopping device so that you can have people shop while they're stuck in a traffic jam from their cars. Who knows, right? It all starts with somebody coming up with an idea and developing the service. So with the API portal, this allows you to do that and connect into the rest of the platform to provide the whole omni-channel experience. So a great example of this is Best Buy, who's clearly a retailer who has all of these new opportunities for leveraging new channels to market. As a high-tech retailer, will certainly be on the cutting edge of all these new channels of service, but is also clearly under threat from new competition, especially from Amazon, and needs to be extremely agile and proactive in making sure that the channels are exploited. And of course, a retailer of this magnitude has to consider all the other non-functional pieces that we talked about. So, they've been very aggressive in going to market to facilitate innovation around getting, the open development community, soliciting that community for new ideas, has been very on the cutting edge of connecting and using social networks as an opportunity for new revenue channels and as communication around new offerings. And from a technological standpoint, has been very, as a high-tech retailer, is definitely walking the walk and has been very innovative around how they utilize cloud-based services. So, we've worked with Best Buy for quite a while now in a number of different use cases. Probably most, from a technology standpoint, most interestingly, as the gateway into their cloud-based infrastructure that allows them to scale up, scale down. When Best Buy has the Black Friday and Cyber Monday events, their volumes will go up to 100 times what they normally are. And so it's not practical to go and store, have all sorts of idle hardware throughout the year. So they do leverage cloud-based services in order to deliver services and use the Layer 7 API management platform in order to help them scale, help provide secure connectivity between their data centers and their cloud-based services, and help apply policies that ensure that they're taking into consideration identity and security along the way. Okay, and we'll just, of course, just to get back to our Amazon fanboy theme, it is very notable, no matter what Amazon's new offerings feel like, and they can feel very disruptive, and they can even feel quite antagonistic if you're a retailer, they're always, with varying degrees of sincerity, there's always a strong case to be made that they benefit the customer. Anything around something like talking about same-day delivery or predictive distribution, where they're talking about shipping to their locations in anticipation of people shopping. All of these things have benefits to the customer. And so, this is the mindset of the Amazon ethos. And really, this should be the mindset for Omni-Channel. Because more than anything, Omni-Channel isn't about offering, the next great channel. Omni-Channel is about offering retail services that start with the consumer, really. It's, as I said before, it's not about how do you pull in as many people as possible to your store. It's about how do you push your services to each individual consumer based on their individual needs. Well, thanks very much for your time today, and thanks especially to Rich for the really interesting dissection of the whole retail industry and how APIs are fundamental for the future and present of the retail industry. At this point, I'm going to revisit the chat box to take our questions here. So first question is kind of a general question. Do you have white papers, webinars, tools for testing the API services? Yes, we absolutely, if you go to our website, layer7tech.com, we have all sorts of these assets, as well as the opportunity to get a free trial of our solution. I think that we cover a whole variety of topics. We have recorded webinars. Even if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of information and even deeper tech talks, which get into some of the more technical aspects of things. Here's another, what I would classify, not necessarily retail specific, but an interesting question. Is API synonymous with RESTful API? Sort of. I think that in the sense that when we talk about APIs, we're definitely talking about web APIs. And by web APIs, we mean distributed systems connecting over the network to access services. The most common pattern for this, especially in the open web, is RESTful APIs. But we would probably consider, SOA web services, even some other device-specific protocols as being APIs if you can describe a useful piece of business functionality that's behind an interface. API, the term, is, if you look at it literally, is quite a historical term in computing, and it goes probably back, to the mainframe of the 60s, where you're just looking for ways to call into programming libraries. But I think it's pretty well understood in the industry now that we're talking about web APIs, which, RESTful APIs are a very big subset of APIs. And another question, what kind of security considerations should one adopt for REST-based APIs? Well, do we have another couple hours? There's lots of security considerations. I would say, again, we've got some great information. I think there's a really strong white paper from our former CTO of Layer 7, who's now our distinguished engineer within CA, Scott Morrison, that gets into a lot of the basics around API security. I think it's called the How-To Guide for OAuth and API Security. Okay. Okay, this question, data access and how quickly it's accessed is obviously important. What indicators do you suggest using to determine to call an external API via Layer 7 versus calling directly to the internal data source? Okay, that's an interesting question. So, and maybe we can even go back to the Bezos platform mandate. So, let's say you're a company and you have a bunch of data sitting in a relational database somewhere, and you're saying, why would we expose that as an API versus just making a direct call in the database? Well, I think the first point of evaluation is, if you have unless your application is the application it acts as the system of, has all the system of record functions for that data store, I would just, I would challenge you to come up with any reason why it wouldn't be a better idea to offer a RESTful API in front of that data source. If you're going to have multiple applications, multiple endpoints using that data, then you will find that there's so much more value for developers to design an API that is going to meet their needs and actually mimics their interactions more effectively than if you just say, here's the schema for the database, have at it. It gives you the opportunity to provide stronger documentation, gives you an opportunity to expose to more channels. Let's say that at first you think, well, this is just an internal application, I just need to go and access that data. I'll just do that directly and no need to create an API. Well, what happens if you have a mobile app that now wants to use that data? You're certainly not going to have the mobile app making SQL calls into your internal network to do that. So I think I think that any time you've got data that's of value that you're going to be exposing to developers that are not in groups that own the data, it's going to be valuable to create an API. And our goal with our technology is to make that experience as easy as possible. Okay. Thanks very much to everyone. If you have any other follow-up questions, we'll be sure to follow up by email, but we're just a little bit over time. It's been our pleasure, and thanks again, Rich, and we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Thanks.